Holly Cotton here, and I am so excited to introduce you to our guest today. First, let me go down all of his accolades. I have Jake, call him Coach Jake Fishbein, who is an acclaimed New York City based executive coach, facilitator, men's work leader, soon to be author. He's going to tell us all about that. And Jake's perspective on what we're going to talk about today is about men's growth and development. And you guys know I'm always about the women empowerment. I always have a woman in here kicking butt, but today it's for the fellas. So I have Jake Fishbein. So welcome, Jake.
Thank you, Holly. It's great to be here with you.
Yes. So first, let's just go right into what that means, Jake, because when we're talking about men's coach, what does that mean? Because there is this stereotype that men are the leaders. Men can walk in a room and already have this dominance about them. They're ready to be in those boss roles. But as you are going to tell us today, that's obviously not always true. And not men don't maybe don't know how to, I don't know what's sashay it like women may do it. So tell us about what your mission is and what are you doing for it?
Absolutely. Well, a number of different things. I work in both the corporate sphere and also the personal development sphere. And in the corporate sphere, I work with both men and women. But in the personal development sphere, it's strictly mostly with men. And I mean, I've worked with men who have intense imposter syndrome, men who feel a lot of pressure to lead in a certain way, men who don't feel like they can give themselves permission to show up in any way other than how a man is supposed to look. And so while men may be able to walk into a room and dominate in many ways, they may not always feel comfortable doing that. They may feel like they have to do that. They may feel like if they're not doing that, they're doing something wrong. And so it's way more complicated and complex than I think many people look at. In fact, I used to run programs and still do sometimes with a wonderful women's coach out of Boston. And we had a series called Building a Better Workplace, where we'd gather men and women together and have a conversation about what the experience is like for a woman in the workplace, what the experience is like for a man in the workplace. And what was so interesting is how similar the experiences are, even if the examples and specific situations were different.
That's interesting because I could tell you as a woman in corporate America, I always feel like I always feel like there's some bias when I walk in the room, especially even being a minority woman. Everyone is kind of waiting to see what is she going to say? How is she going to handle this situation? What is she going to do? So, I mean, and here we think men are just these confident beings that just walk in and everything just falls into place. So, Jake's going to continue to tell us about that, you guys, and let us so we can have some empathy towards that. So one of the things that I know that you talk about that is one of your talking points that you answer a lot of questions about, and that's navigating the aftermath, where you discuss real challenges post decision making. So what exactly does that mean? What is the aftermath of, and what are the decision making processes?
Absolutely. So when I think about decision making, and I see it, people will listen, we make decisions all day long. Everything from what am I going to eat for breakfast to am I going to have this challenging conversation or not? And oftentimes the focus is on the decision itself. So the actual choice, what am I eating for breakfast? Am I going to have this conversation? And it's not always on, well, how am I actually going to navigate and show up as I make that choice? And I started being introduced to this or thinking about this about 4 years ago when I ended a 4 year relationship I was in. And it was really hard to make that choice to end the relationship, even though I knew it's what I needed to do. But what was harder was actually navigating what came after ending the relationship to end it in an honorable, kind, and loving way. That's what's tough. The decision can be challenging to make because it's scary thinking about what might happen. Am I making the right choice? How is this going to reflect on me? And I don't think we often give enough thought to, well, how am I going to show up as I navigate this choice and the aftermath, the outcome, the effects of actually choosing? Because once you make the choice, it's super vulnerable. You don't know how someone's going to respond. You don't know how the situation is going to unfold. And being really intentional about how you want to navigate that, I think that's how you leave a legacy. That it's not necessarily your choices that create the legacy, it's how you show up in choosing them and navigating what comes after that impacts the legacy that you leave with the people in your world, people you know, people you don't know, and importantly, the legacy you leave with yourself and how you feel about who you are.
And that's the aftermath. Okay, I like that. I like that. And I think, and I'm going to ask you for another example other than the relationship one, but I think a lot of people, especially my listeners, we always kind of talk about entrepreneurship and these roles that we have as grown adults now, where you have to make real life decisions. And I know that for me sometimes as well, I get so focused on the task. This has to be done by all costs. This is it. This is it. So I'm not thinking about the aftermath. I'm thinking about I need this and I need the results from this, and whatever comes after it is what it is. So, what is like something that maybe was one of your I guess your stories, or someone that you coached, maybe something that they told you, a personal experience, just because I know a lot of people like to know a real life example of things to kind of really make that resonate with them.
Absolutely. So I have the first thing that comes to mind is I had a client, I worked with her for many years. She worked in corporate America for a very large financial institution in machine learning. And I didn't know the first thing about machine learning, so I couldn't help her with any of that. But we worked together and she really wanted a promotion. And she'd been at the company for a long time. And an opportunity came up and she decided to go for it. She put together a whole presentation. She talked to everybody involved. She gave the presentation, felt very good about it. And afterwards found out that they had already decided who they were giving the promotion to before the interview process even started, which is a pretty common occurrence inside corporate America. And it
Mhm.
would have been easy for her after that to give up, to become very resentful, to become a victim to the circumstances of having put in all that work for no real outcome, and to give up, to leave the company, to just settle for her lot. And instead, she chose really intentionally that she still wanted a promotion. She still wanted to grow. And she used how hard she worked in searching and looking for that promotion in that role to springboard to the next opportunity. That we talked a lot about how do you show up in the role that you, as the role that you want. A lot of times people will say, fake it till you make it. And I really dislike that phrase. I like to say, be it until you are it. So choose to
Mhm.
show up at the level you desire to be. Choose to be an executive now, even if you're not an executive. And people will notice your impact will actually change. And what ended up happening is people noticed her showing up differently. People noticed how hard she went after that promotion. And the next time a new role opened up, she was the one who was slotted in for the promotion before the hiring process actually started. And she was able to leap into a role that was really exciting for her. And it was all because she chose really intentionally how to navigate that aftermath versus
Mhm.
just allowing it to affect her and react in a way that it would have been totally understandable had she left that defeated. And she chose not to.
Okay, so tell me again, instead of fake it till you make it, be it till you are it.
Are it. Be it until you are it.
Okay. Mental note. I got it right there now.
Yeah,
Don't
because we
go
we
ahead, Jake.
always have access to choosing how we want to show up.
Mhm.
And while we may not always have the skills, we know or have an idea of how to show up in the qualities that we aspire to be. So if we want to be confident and we're not, we can think about how do I demonstrate confidence? What's going to help me show up as confident? Because it's a choice to be confident, even if we
Mhm.
don't have the evidence. There will never be enough evidence to prove confidence. And yet, if I know what it looks like for someone to be confident, I can choose to be that way, even if I don't feel it necessarily.
Okay. All right, Jake. I like that. I like that. Don't worry if I steal anything that you say. I will give you credits on when I use you as a caption or something on my Instagram. I love that. I love that. And so another common topic that you have to coach people on is modern male struggle and addressing the crisis and understanding the crisis, because a lot of people don't even know that there is a crisis. So I know you kind of gave us a little sprinkle of the male struggle before, but can you go into that a little bit more? Because I do have a lot of male listeners as well.
Absolutely. There are a number of different struggles, and I think you can look across the board. A lot of times, these struggles are human struggles, not just male struggles. I like to think about my work as human work, that it's applicable for anybody. I tend to do a lot of work, especially in the group sphere with men. But what I see in men in particular is that there's a really big struggle in terms of loneliness and connection, that men don't have strong relationships anymore. And there's a lot of data on this. I never remember all the statistics, but something like 1 in 5 men don't have close friends. And that's a real struggle. That one of the early talks I listened to when COVID hit in 2020 was by this man, Dr. Tal Ben Shahar of the Happiness Studies Academy. And he was talking about resilience. And he said there are 5 keys to resilience. And then the one he said that was most impactful for resilience and happiness was relationships. And so many men don't invest in their relationships. We're actually taught from a young age not to. That as a man, it's about results, it's about being dominant, it's about being more than, it's about proving our masculinity versus having deep, meaningful connections with other men. That a lot of men, they'll say, I'm going to go hang out with the boys. And I always cringe when I hear that, because one, if you're a man in your 30s, you're not hanging out with the boys, you're hanging out with men. um, but more than that, it always implies to me doing stuff that boys would do, being side by side, not talking about anything serious, not being vulnerable, not opening up about struggles. Men are notorious for sharing after the fact. So that's another of the crises I see, is men don't share. They don't share until they absolutely have to, or until they've gotten through the things that's challenging. I've heard so many times in our groups, someone will be silent for 3 weeks, and then they'll share and say, I've had a really tough 3 weeks, but I got through it. And there's this refusal for men to acknowledge in the moment, I'm struggling. And I think a large part of it is not wanting to seem weak in front of other men. There's this great book called For the Love of Men by Liz Peek, I believe is her name. And she wrote that for women, femininity is implied, that women always have access to femininity. And obviously this isn't broad generality.
Hmm.
But for men, masculinity is something they have to prove every day. And
Mm.
it's proving every day to the other men in their lives. I actually believe men are incredibly fragile. No man would acknowledge that, but it's my experience that men are incredibly fragile and their egos are incredibly fragile. And it's so easy for them to feel their masculinity taken away, because a lot of men have a core belief that they don't matter, that they're not good enough, that they're not masculine enough. And so it's so easy to feel that fragility, that balance taken away from them, which is why I think we do see men show up as more domineering in a lot of places. I always say when people talk in the workplace, they complain about people with loud voices, people who drown out the conversation, who don't let other people feel heard. And my assessment of that situation, and it's oftentimes men, is those are the people who don't feel heard. They don't feel like their voice matters. And so they elevate it. So they speak louder because there's a deficiency at the core. And I think that gives us access to a lot more compassion and empathy for people, and maybe understanding for how to actually approach those situations versus just getting angry. And I'm not saying that's not a problem. I think it is a serious problem. And like I said, I do believe that it's an indication of a lacking feeling inside the person, that our behaviors are always following the beliefs we have about who we are and how the world is. And it's working with those core beliefs that we make a lot of progress. And but the experience I have is that men, as much as anybody else, have core beliefs that are disempowering and don't work.
Mm. That that is such an interesting perspective. And I'm saying that in my head as you're talking. I'm saying to myself that I do think that especially because now, since I've been doing my show, I have all these mental health advocates that come on and talk about mental health. And there's this huge initiative that is developing that is a push towards identifying men's mental health issues. And whenever you think mental health, people automatically assume bipolar, schizophrenia, depression, but there's so many minute things, like you said, just the way that you may feel that you don't have confidence, or the way that you may not feel masculine, and or someone can be questioning you. And also, me as a woman, I grew up in a little country town in Louisiana. And so there were like two separate types of women. There were the women that they had the southern belles, where they could be taken care of and embraced, and then there was the other side where I was, where where you gotta go and you learn how to saw and cut and change your brakes on your car. Like you have, so it's like I always had that. So as I've sort of gone in my growth journey, I realized that a lot of the behaviors that I have were because of that, and always having to be so strong and always having to be so independent. And I realize that now I don't have to be loud. I don't have to walk in and force people to know that I know how to do things. But whenever you are in that situation, you have to constantly prove yourself. So I love that you are doing that and bringing that awareness to men and women, because like you said, you're doing men and women, and a lot of women are like me, where you have, maybe you feel like you have to prove that you know how to do something to get accepted into the club. Or there's so many of these gray areas. It's not just black and white. So I love that. I love that. I love that. And so, what do you do, Jake? Because I feel whenever people have these roles that they take on as a coach, and they give people advice, and they help other people navigate certain things. So, how do you stop those things from getting to you and make sure you keep your mental health in a happy space, and you're not being drawn down because you hear people going through all of these things? So what do you do for Jake's mental health to keep you in that great space as well?
It's a great question, and part of it is actually not always trying to be in the great space, is
Mm,
allowing for the natural ups and downs of life. That I had a conversation a few months ago, and the conversation was about feeling alive. And it's something I talk about a lot. The men's group I run is called The Arena, after Brene Brown's work around vulnerability and Teddy Roosevelt's famous quote about being a man in the arena. And we talk about that being alive is about being in the arena. And being in the arena doesn't guarantee victory. It's not all roses and ice cream, that it's blood and sweat and tears too. And being alive isn't just about feeling good and feeling the highs. It's about feeling the lowest lows too, and allowing yourself to feel them. That staying at an even level, that's flatlining. And living is not about flatlining. It's about being with the ups and downs. And so part of how I take care of myself is to do my best when I'm not feeling great, to be with it and accept it and ride with it, which is really hard. And just like anybody else, I want to get out of it as fast as possible. But so much of it, so much of the learning and the growth is in being with those challenges and the discomfort and unpleasurable moments. So that's part of it. But other than that, I'm in a men's group myself. I've been in a group for almost 8 years. I have a therapist. I invest heavily in my relationships. I do my best to set boundaries around my screen time so I don't get sucked into social media rabbit holes or YouTube rabbit holes. For example, a couple weeks ago, I went to Scotland by myself for a week. I didn't check email for 7 days. I only texted with my girlfriend. I was totally present and did something to take care of myself, which meant driving these beautiful Scottish roads for 5 days. And it's doing those little things, knowing what's an investment in my bucket. How do I take care of myself? We have a saying in our men's group that I get to love me so that I can love you, so that you can love you, so that you can love me back. that I know in my work, which is so much about giving to others, I need to take care of myself. And I'm naturally ambiverted. I take the Myers Briggs, and I'm an E or an I on a different day. And so one way I take care of myself is leaning into my introversion and having a night like this Wednesday night. I have the night set aside for me. I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to sit on my couch and watch television, or I'll read. That finding those moments to invest in myself is important. And in large part, when I don't feel well, it's about reaching out to people and talking about it, not to fix the situation, but to really be with what's coming up. And I have a variety, like I said, I have a therapist. I do work with this man named Tom Delano, who I recommend to so many of my clients. He does work called memory reconciliation, which is about working with the unconscious part of your brain, your amygdala, to really work on your fight, flight, and freeze to feel safe. That so many of our challenges stem from not feeling safe. And as you were talking about how you grew up and you had to prove and really take care of yourself, I mean, we all have versions of that, of the behaviors we had to adapt to survive. And they work. They work until they don't work anymore. And they help us feel safe and whole until they stop doing that, or until they're no longer necessary. And unfortunately, if we continue those behaviors when they're no longer necessary, they can be a detriment to our feeling safe, a detriment to our feeling whole, and our detriment to creating meaningful relationships. And a lot of the work that I personally do is how to unlearn those behaviors and notice when I'm going into an automatic that keeps me safe, and how do I regulate my own nervous system to get grounded in the reality of my situation, not the catastrophizing that my mind creates.
Hmm. Mm. And then also, I just wanted to reiterate the point that you made. We put so many things on our schedule, but I love that you said that you make a point to put you on your schedule as well, because our calendars have 8 million things on it, but there's never anything in there about, hey, you know what? Actually, I'm going to block out this time for me. And also not to feel guilty for doing that. I know a lot of people, especially parents or people that are caregivers, they feel guilty for doing that, but they don't realize that that is a huge part of, like you said, I have to be the best version of me so I can be the best version for you, so then you can be the best version for me. It's a
Yeah,
cycle. It's a cycle. So I love that perspective. And so one of the things I know that you talk about in a few of the topics that you are constantly sort of doing in your men's group and speaking about as Coach Jake is about accountability. And there's a couple of different umbrellas that accountability falls under, but I've seen that word as kind of a theme for a few of them. And I'm always preaching about accountability, but in different parts, in different aspects of things. So tell us how accountability is a main focus for some of the things whenever you're coaching.
absolutely. For me, accountability fits in right with integrity. And accountability doesn't always mean you do what you say you're going to do. It means that when you don't, you take responsibility for it and recommit to it, or don't recommit to it. That in coaching, I try to end every session with some action step my clients are going to take. And that's usually created by them. Coaching is so much about the client creating their own solutions. Sometimes I'll offer them. And a lot of times, we come back the next session, we talk about what they did or what they didn't do. And if they didn't do it, the accountability isn't a reprimand. It's not, by when are you going to do this? Well, it is by when you're going to do this, but it starts with what got in the way. What did you make more important? What prevented you from following through? What can you learn from the fact that you didn't? Because that's where the value is. The value is actually in the breakdowns. That I remember as a kid, I was terrible at math. And I remember in seventh grade, I got a math test back. I did very poorly on it. It was marked up with red. And I was standing outside with my dad at our house in Santa Fe. And he said, "Look at the red. Look at the things you got wrong." And I didn't, because it was pretty shameful to look at all of my errors. But I think back on that a lot because he was so spot on. and that the value isn't always in looking at what we did right. Yes, it's important to celebrate, to acknowledge ourselves for our successes, but it's equally as important to look at what we didn't do well, what we didn't do correctly, because that's where we can actually learn. I can't learn much about myself seeing what I did well. I can affirm what I'm good at, but the growth opportunities are where there are gaps. And so that's part of accountability, is actually looking at where didn't I succeed and how do I work on that in order to succeed going forward. So that's the first part. In the men's group, we work with accountability a lot because my experience is men are not accountable. Men do not take responsibility. Again, really broad generality. There are a lot of men who are accountable and a lot of men who take responsibility, but there are equally a lot of men who don't. And I run a men's group. The group's been around for almost 4 years. The men are amazing. They're terrific. They're really good men, and they struggle with accountability. And a large part of struggling with accountability is it's holding other people accountable. And that's something we see a lot, is men struggling to hold each other accountable, to call each other out when someone doesn't follow through with what they said they're going to do. And when we talk about the men's group, we think of it as a metaphor for your life. So if you're not calling people out in the group, you're not calling people out in your life. And that's a real challenge and an issue. And a lot of the reason why people don't hold others accountable is because they don't want to be held accountable. And that emphasis gets said, if I hold you accountable, I'm asking to be held accountable myself, which is oftentimes not something somebody wants. And so we work with it a lot because we believe in a world with more honorable men. And we believe that honorable men are men who are accountable, men who come back into integrity when they are out of integrity, and men who hold others, those around them, accountable to what those people said they were going to do too. Because the world needs more accountability. Again, not from a place of reprimand or punishment, but from a place of compassion and empowerment. That accountability is a pathway to power and empowerment and growth, not a stick or a reprimand for what someone has done wrong.
Right. And I'll be honest, as you were talking, I have a situation that reminds me of something. And so it's like when someone does point out something and you're kind of like, you kind of know that it wasn't the right way to handle a situation, or that it was probably it wasn't the best way to do it, or you did something wrong. So I think that's why we also get sensitive, because you did something and then now someone is like, hey, I saw you do that, it's like what, it makes me think of something similar to where you see it all the time on sitcoms, and someone is eating a grape out of the grocery store or something, and the kid will be like, hey, you stole a grape, and then the person is like, no, I didn't. But those are the little things in life. There's so many little things that we do. Everyone thinks accountability is a big thing, but it could just be those little things that are stairs to the big thing. It could be, hey, your thought process may not be the best for this, and that's why every time you get to point F, you have the same outcome, or when people feel like they're a victim. Oh, everything always happens to me. I always have the worst luck. Well, maybe because what you're doing over here at the beginning, you keep getting the same results, because this is the part you need accountability, not when you do the major screw up, but maybe these other things. So I love that you were saying that. So good points, Jake. Jake, you should be a coach.
You think?
Okay, so before we wrap up and everything, I wanted to give you an opportunity, because Jake is actually joining us in the author bus, and I'm super excited. I love when people are doing something and able to actually put that in their own words in their own book. Now people are going to be able to use that and hold it and carry it. And now people will quote, hey, so did y'all read that Jake Fishbein book in chapter 13? He did this or he said that. So I love that people will be able to also use you in that reference as well. So do you want to give us any tidbits, some insight on the book, when we can pick it up, how we can get it, support you?
Yes. Well, no insight on when it will be out yet, but
Okay.
if you sign up for my newsletter, there will be plenty of updates when the time comes. But it's a novel that I've been working on with my mentor for almost 8 years. It's a novel about a men's group. So it's about relationships of all kind and the impact of being honest, especially for men, being honest and vulnerable with each other, with their parents, with their families, with their significant others, and what's possible for all people when we're honest, vulnerable, and trust ourselves. And it's what led me into this work in large part. My mentor, Nick Papadopoulos, 8 years ago, just about 8 years ago in February, he had run men's groups for 10 years at that point, and asked me if I'd write a book with him because he was not a writer. And I got chills up and down my spine and said, yes, let's do it as a novel. And decided if I was going to write a book about a men's group, I better be in a men's group. and I always say it's been the single most transformative experience I've had, because it had me explore all the different aspects of myself and my soul in order to spread this message and inspire people to be honest, to be honorable, to be vulnerable, and to do it through fiction and not self-help. I always think I read some self-help books, but I always think that for myself, I get way more from a novel than I do a self-help book, because a novel gives me the access to think about it through my own lens without being told what to think by the author. And I know that our beta readers so far who've read this novel, that each of them has had a different experience. Each of them has gravitated towards a different character. Each of them has had a different breakthrough in their own life. Because our intention in this novel is that as you read along to these characters' journeys, you're asking the questions that they're being asked of yourself, that you're going on your own transformational journey as you read this novel, or not. You could also just read it for fun. I hear it's a page turner, which is very exciting. We're in the final edits of our book. We've hired a second editor to help us tighten it up and make it a little bit more concise, and then we'll be pitching it to agents. So that will be the next step, and hopefully we can get it onto bookshelves and into hands soon, because I really do believe that the world needs this book now. The world needs this message, and the world needs more honesty and vulnerability and integrity.
Okay, I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm ready. I love to read a good novel. So I love books in general, but yes, I think so. So and I think there was there was a some type of survey that was done. I can't remember who it was. I'm seeing him on Instagram, but it was some kind of something, and he had the statistics. I don't remember what the details were, but the statistics showed of the people, there's only 50% of people that will actually read a self-help book from beginning to end, because you read the first few pages or whatever, first few chapters, you get motivated, and now where is it? It's on the nightstand or on the bookshelf or on something. So people are always like, they don't even read. You have a whole book and you only read. That's why self-help books should only be 100 pages or something, because people don't even read it. So
Yeah,
I think
I'm in the 50% that doesn't finish them. Like, I've just stopped buying them because I know I'm not inspired to read them. Whereas a novel, I will be committed to finishing it until the last page is
I
turned.
mean, same. And I'll be motivated. It's not that they did anything wrong. It's just if you go in my room and look on my nightstand, you would think I was the most woke, mental health advocate. You would a motivated person. You're like, man, she's got all these great things, but no, they're just half done. So that's sad. But hey, for my books, I want you guys to make sure you read front to back. Don't play.
Just
So
pretend you didn't hear all of these statistics.
yeah, we're talking about everyone except for Jake Fishbein and Holly Cotton. So everyone else, Don't worry about them. Uh, so, all right. So, Jake, thank you for sharing all of that great information as well. You definitely gave us a lot of key points, a lot of great topics, a lot of things that I know I want to make sure that I implement into my life as well. So, how can people find you, like you, support you, all of that great stuff? And then also make sure you spell anything like your website or whatever, because some people may be driving or on cardio because we do audio and visual. So make sure you spell it for the ones who are just too trifling to go look at the actual podcast notes. But, we help them out. So drop all that information for the listeners.
You got it, Holly. Well, the best place to find me is on my website, which is www.jakefishbein.com. That's JAKEFISHBEIN.com. You can reach me at jake@jakefishbein.com on email. I am on Instagram, but I don't really check it that much at the Coach Jake. So TheCoachJake. And I'm also on Instagram under Jacob Fishbein, JACOB, my last name, which I think I've spelled enough times so
Yeah,
far. But
right.
really, the best way to stay up to date with my work is going to my website and subscribing to my newsletter. I send out a newsletter. I aspire to send it weekly. I'm still getting there, but it's an opportunity to read different musings on what I'm working on, what's going on in my world, as well as I include what are called beautiful questions, which I adopted from this great poet, David White, who uses poetry to guide transformational change. And I also include exercises that people can do, links to podcasts like Holly's that I've been on, and any upcoming events, both virtual and in person. So if you're listening and you're in New York City, I happen to do events semi-regularly. Would love to see you come out. But again, best way to find me is my website and subscribing to my newsletter, which is affectionately known as The Hungry Reader, because I start each one with Dear Hungry Reader. I had a food blog in college that began with that, and I just can't write an email to multiple people without saying Dear Hungry Reader. And who knows, people might be hungry for knowledge or food. Everyone's
Yeah.
hungry at some point. So
Well, that's what I was saying. It's just a different type of hunger now. So yeah, you should be hungry. You should. We're in this growth phase right now where you're still needing to be on your growth journey. You're still needing to heal. You're still needing to do stuff, be a better person, whatever. So that way, whenever you're on your deathbed, you don't have a life of regrets, and you leave nothing but people that love you and people who were inspired by you in some kind of way. So I love that. Dear Hungry Reader. I'm going to have to subscribe to the newsletter as well.
please do, Holly. I've got one coming out tomorrow morning. So
Okay, okay, good. Love it, love it, love it. So that is Jake Fishbein, you guys. Thank you, Jake.
thank you.